Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please do subscribe, and if you're old here, hello again. My name's Philpott and I cover true crime cases on my channel, which leads me on to the fact that this video is very different. I'm in a different place because there's no point in doing my whole setup. You'll understand why in a sec. Quick explanation. I did an entire week of research on a very interesting case before I realised just how sensitive it is and just how unsafe it is to cover. So I'm like a whole week behind my schedule. The reason it was so unsafe for me to cover is because it's an Irish case and it's a current case. We're in my room, so the lighting's going crazy. This brings me back. And basically in that case, the perpetrator hasn't technically killed anyone, although they have shown that they're a very dangerous person. The fact that they haven't actually killed someone, there's not exactly a whole lot to keep them locked up for. But anyway, they're awaiting trial at the moment. They have done some stuff, but they served time when they were a juvenile. It's a whole thing. Basically, there is a chance that this incredibly dangerous person will get out. And I didn't exactly want my face and my name to be what comes up when they search their own name, because they have searched themselves before. They have shared articles about themselves on a Twitter account, and oh, I wish I could just tell you because it's just so interesting. But if when it does go to trial, they get a very, very lengthy sentence or, you know, something, then I will cover it. But in the meantime, while I'm researching for next week's video, this is what we're gonna do. Some of you already follow my TikTok, and if you do, you'll have seen that I've been covering cases like TikTok style, gathering as much of the most important information of a case and whittling it down into 60 seconds. So what I'm gonna do for this week, just while I am in the process of getting next week's video ready, I've just edited them all together. So we're gonna have a little compilation kind of thing going on. So I'm just gonna have all the little timestamps for each individual case in the description below. To be honest, a lot of the cases I've done on TikTok that I've also done on YouTube were from like when I started my YouTube, so most of you won't have seen those. And so you're gonna get like a spritz and a spray of some true crime this week. So it's time for me to stop blabbing and let's get to it. Enjoy! Don't you just love when murderers are just wandering around free? This day, 55 years ago, Mairead Deener was doing laundry in the laundromat and she ran out of change. She left to go get some more change and she never came back from what should have just been a 5-minute walk. Mairead had been murdered, and they found out that it had been a previously convicted sex offender that shot her. This man right here, Lesser Eubanks. So he went to prison, but in 1973, he escaped. Almost 50 years ago, and he's still at large. He got out because he was out on a Christmas shopping trip, unsupervised. He was just allowed to roam free in a shopping centre and he just never came back. This was on a very recent episode of Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix, and since it's gone up, in the last 2 weeks there have been a ton of new leads coming in, and they know that he's still alive and they're getting closer. This is what he might look like now. Click the plus sign for more updates on this case and leave case requests in the comments. Hello! Missing person alert! This is Linda Stoltzfoos. She's an 18-year-old from the Amish community and she went missing from Pennsylvania almost 2 months ago now. She was on her way home from church at about 12:30 p.m. before going to youth group at 2 p.m, but she never got home in between. Witnesses saw her being escorted into a red car by a man, driving away and looking at people with scared eyes. The car was traced back to Husto Smoker, who was acting sketchy in the days after her disappearance. He was seen peering into the windows of a building in the middle of nowhere, and not long after that, Linda's bra and stockings were found behind that building. He was also only just released from prison last year after spending 12.5 years in there for several robberies. He was arrested for felony kidnapping and misdemeanor false imprisonment and is being held without bail. But she still hasn't been found, and this is what she looks like in street clothes. Missing or murdered? This is a woman called Giedre who was 29 years old when she went missing over 2 years ago from Laytown in Meath. It's thought that she was intoxicated or drugged when she left the house in the middle of the night with a group of men. She had recently fallen into a bad crowd with some Lithuanian criminals who, you know, are part of organising prostitution rings and drugs for the country. And some of the people that the police wanted to talk to have since left the country and they never got to talk to them, which But essentially, Giedre just disappeared into thin air. She hasn't been seen or heard from since, and it's believed that she was drugged, murdered, and her body was dumped in the border between Louth and Meath. So if you have any information whatsoever, even if you think it's nothing, it could be the missing link, because a lot of the information on this case isn't even public. So you will not believe how preventable this girl's murder was. Her name was Laura McCluskey and she was a track and field star at the University of Utah. She briefly dated this guy who introduced himself as Sean Fields, but his actual name was Melvin Rowland and he was a registered sex offender and had done 10 years in prison for rape. She didn't know any of this until she had already been dating him for 5 or 6 weeks. She received threatening anonymous texts, she was a victim of revenge porn, and she became very concerned for her safety and her life very quickly. Even after reaching out to the campus police and city police over 20 times in a couple of weeks, they did absolutely nothing. Melvin approached her in a car park when she was alone and shot her multiple times before running off and shooting himself. And he should have been in jail already because he had only been given a warning when he violated his parole. This little boy remembers how he died in his past life. James was obsessed with warplanes from a very young age, and even at the age of 2 he had all this insane knowledge that he couldn't have gotten from anywhere. He would do these drawings and sign them James 3 because according to him he was the 3rd James. He started having crazy night terrors around this time as well. It was always the same nightmare, and afterwards he'd say to his mum, "Airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out." He would say that his plane was shot down, and when his parents asked him who shot the plane down, he said, "The Japanese," like obviously. Then he told them his plane took off from a boat called the Natoma. It was a real boat, and real planes took off from this boat in World War II. He also recalled a friend of his called Jack Larson. He was a real man and he was still alive, so James got to meet him. After more digging, they found out that the plane crash James claimed to have died in actually took place. And in that plane was James Houston Jr. This is new James and James Houston Jr.'s sister. He knew so many details, their age gap, their prized possessions, even nicknames. I'm convinced. Click the plus sign for more and leave case request below. Imagine being abducted at 8 hours old. Well, that's what happened to Kamiyah Mobley. A woman impersonated a nurse and hung around the hospital for 14 hours and then befriended Kamiyah's mother so that she could sneak in and take the baby when the time was right. The reason she did this was because she had had a late miscarriage and she was in an abusive relationship, so she was scared that if she didn't produce a baby that she would get more abuse for it. But luckily, at 18 years of age, Kamiyah and her original family were reunited, but they were total strangers to Kamiyah. The woman who abducted her got 18 years in prison, which I think is fair. But Kamiyah did love this woman. She was her mother. She actually gave her a happy life, and these other people were just random people, and they are working on their relationship now, but that's gotta be a head fuck. I'm sorry. Oh, missing person alert. This is Lydia Abrams, a 65-year-old, now 66, from Mountain Center, California. She was last seen around 2 p.m. on the 6th of June when she was doing some work on her ranch on Apple Canyon Road. Her car, phone, keys, and purse were all left behind, which is a little concerning. Since she went missing, her birthday and her wedding date have both passed. Something that's a little weird is since she went missing, a number of her assets were transferred to an unknown person. Also weird is that she is one of 6 people that's gone missing in the mountain communities in California just in the last 5 months. What is going on there? And if somehow this has made it to California and you know something or you saw something or something weird, these are the details down here or after hours here at the bottom. My hand isn't showing up. But yeah, people don't just go missing for no reason, so what's going on? Detective assigned. Who killed the Gonzales family? Teddy and Loiva were the parents and Seth and Claudine were the kids. After a full day of work and an evening of chilling with a friend, Seth walked into his house and found both his parents dead on the floor. Soon after this, he found Claudine dead as well. And they hadn't just been murdered, they had been brutally murdered. Strangled, stabbed, hit with baseball bats, you name it. It seemed like a robbery gone wrong, so Seth embarked on a journey for justice. He did press conferences, sang at their funerals, and all I'll say is he was very good at playing the victim card. Side note, his inheritance was $1.5 million and he was entitled to a payout of $15,000 because he was a victim of these crimes. So Seth moved to a nice neighbourhood, bought a nice car, pawned both his parents' cars in for $68,000 and pawned his dead mom's jewellery. Then he contacted his godmother in the Philippines and said he needed $190,000 for a brain surgery. In case you didn't guess, his brain's fine. Long story short, he's now in prison for life for 3 counts of murder. More on my YouTube. There are some weird circumstances around Alison McKenzie's disappearance. She's a 43-year-old mother who was on holidays on a tiny island off the coast of Belize with her boyfriend. Alison would normally have a drink, but she wouldn't actually get drunk, and even her own sister had never seen her drunk. But this night it was reported that she was intoxicated. The last time her boyfriend saw her was around 10 PM that night, which is weird because how can you go missing on a tiny island? And Alison was last seen around 2:30 AM talking to the team leader of the camp. Theory 10. Theory 1. Boyfriend had something to do with it, but he was very cooperative with police and he was distraught. Theory 2. Camp leader. He was the last person to be seen with her, but very professional company. Theory 3. Alison was drunk and got dragged into a current because they were very strong there, but she apparently hated swimming. Theory 4. She was drugged and taken to a crime ring in Belize, but how could they possibly take her without anyone seeing or hearing? Let me know what you think. The island was so small it makes no sense. Who in the world is Peter Bergmann? A man calling himself Peter Bergmann checked into a Sligo hotel in 2009 and 5 days later he was found dead on the nearby beach. He had no identification documents and gave a fake address at the hotel. He sounded German or Austrian or something, and police looked into all the missing person bureaus in all the countries he could have been from, but there were no matches. He left the room 13 times during his 3-day stay and always had a purple plastic bag, but never had one when he came back. They presumed he'd been getting rid of his belongings or something, but after checking all the bins in Sligo, they found nothing. On the 15th of June, he checked out of the hotel and went to Ross's Point Beach. Here, he was seen stepping side to side in a ritualistic manner, and the following morning, he was found dead there. It was initially thought that he drowned, but it actually turned out that he had advanced prostate cancer. So he must have known he was dying, but why get rid of your identity? Like for part 2, and I'll tell you all about the theories, and trust me, they are good. Part 2. Theory time. Theory 1. Literary pilgrimage. W.B. Yeats wrote a novel that has insanely eerie similarities to Peter's situation. It was about a man called John Bergmann, and it tells a story about a man who had a yearning for Sligo and wanted to go and die without anyone knowing who he was. John Sherman also stayed in a hotel for the few days leading up to his death, and the day he died went out for fresh air by a body of water. He went to a river, Peter went to the ocean. Theory 2. Bergmann is actually the name that was used by the son of a high-ranking Nazi leader called Martin Bormann. Interesting given his German/Austrian accent. And just after the war, a man was found wandering the mountains in Austria and he gave the name Bergmann and a fake address when he was asked by a local farmer. This man also had fallen ill. Theory 3. He was an escaped witness protection member. Makes sense as to why you'd want to keep your identity safe and get out for one last time. Theory 4. He just had a tough life and wanted to go die alone. Comment below what you think is most plausible, because what? So this case ruined my life, and it'll ruin yours too, but thank you at least for the request. David Parker Ray, aka the Toybox Killer, is suspected to have murdered up to 60 women. He had a violent, alcoholic father who used to visit him and give him sadomasochistic porn, which is nice. Where does Toybox come from? Well, he soundproofed a van and used it as a sexual torture chamber. He would pose as a police officer, he spiked people's drinks, he even had his own daughter as an accomplice. I don't like it. He would sexually torture and presumably kill his victims with whips, chains, straps, clamps, leg spreader bars, surgical blades and saws. He also, of course, had a lot of sex toys and syringes. He put his victims in wooden contraptions that bent them over and immobilized them, and then he had his dogs and his friends sexually assault them. But no bodies were ever found. And just before he was interrogated by police, he had a heart attack and died. There's obviously a lot more to it, so should I do a full YouTube video on it? Who killed the Bamber family? In 1985, 5 family members were found shot in their own home. Sheila had paranoid schizophrenia and was in a pretty bad state mentally, and there were phone calls to the police saying that she had a gun and went berserk. So it was thought that she killed the rest of the family and then killed herself. But Jeremy, also a sketchy dude, this is her brother. He was acting like a total freak at the funerals, and then he tried to sell 20 nude photos of his now dead sister to a newspaper. What the actual? Some evidence then came out that basically made it impossible for Sheila to have killed herself. So Jeremy, of course, was charged with 5 counts of murder and was given 5 life sentences. Then a ton of evidence came out that basically discounted all of the evidence against him and made it look like Sheila did it again. Jeremy's still in prison to this day. Obviously there is so much more to it as well. There's like 50 twists and turns, but you're in luck because I just did a full YouTube video on it. Someone that's responsible for over 400 deaths is still at large. Her name is Samantha Lewthwaite, and she was the wife of one of the suicide bombers from the 7/7 bombings in 2005, and his name was Jermaine Lindsay. This man's explosion killed 27 people. Now, after the bombings, Samantha didn't report him missing for a whole week. And then she went off the radar for 6 years. Sketchy. This was when Samantha showed up in Kenya, just as another bombing got busted before it happened. And of course, Samantha had links to the guy that got busted for it. In fact, he was actually the one that told her to flee again. She then had ties to the Jericho bar attack, where a bomb was thrown into a busy crowd at a bar. And the Westgate Mall attack, where a bunch of shooters went into a shopping centre and just opened fire at innocent people. And another almost bombing in Mombasa. Why does she keep showing up where terrorist attacks are either happening or about to happen? Imagine accidentally killing 6 of your kids. Well, that's what happened to Mick and Mairead Philpott. Mick, by the way, not the nicest guy. He was convicted of attempted murder of his girlfriend in 1978. He got out after 3 years, people, 3 years. Then he started getting married and having babies. And then he kept getting married and having babies. And these women were always particularly vulnerable and way younger than him. One girl was 14 and he was 37 at the time. So one thing leads to another and he ends up with 17 kids, for the child benefit payments of course. And he remained manipulative, controlling and aggressive with his women, if you want to call it that. Philpott Fire Case Part 2. In 2012, 6 of Mick Philpott's 17 kids died in a house fire in the early hours of the morning. Mick and Mairead watched their house go up in flames, knowing that their children were inside it. It turned out that petrol had been poured through their letterbox. That's not even it. For someone who had just lost 6 of his children, Mick was acting very strangely. For example, he had been bragging about all the money that he had made since the fire because of people's charity. He spoke at a press conference and it was so weird because there was just fake crying and he was fake upset, not shedding tears but like crying. And police were very suspicious of Mick and Mairead, so they bugged their hotel room. And that's when they gained sufficient evidence to confirm that Mick and Mairead were responsible for the fire. They did it for 2 reasons. Number 1, to get a bigger council house. Number 2, to frame Mick's ex for arson so that he could regain custody of the children that he had with her. We say it all the time, but this is why we need to be so careful about who we meet up with from the internet. Eubanks from Raleigh, North Carolina met up with someone from Craigslist to sell his car. And this was on the 12th of September 2020, just gone. Then he disappeared. A day later, his phone was found on the side of the motorway. Another day later, the car he was selling was found over 80 miles away in Virginia. Soon after, a man called Justin Fernando Merritt was charged with stealing the car and robbing Andy. And it wasn't long until Andy's body was found also in Virginia. And only 3 hours later, Justin Fernando Merritt was charged with Andy's murder. And that's why I need to be super careful about who you meet up with from the internet. Please. I'm kind of interested to see if anyone has their own horror stories from meeting up with people online, like Tinder and stuff, so leave them in the comments below. And if you like true crime, you know what to do. Click the plus sign for more. Wow. Is this cold case about to be solved after 27 years? Annie McCarrick was an American girl living in Dublin, Ireland at the time of her disappearance in 1993. Friday, March 26th. Annie visited the bank in Sandymount and then did a food shop that morning. The bags from her food shop were still on the counters when she went missing and no food was put away, even the perishables. A little later in the day, she calls a friend to ask if she wants to join her in the mountains, but unfortunately her friend couldn't attend. Annie then gets the 18 bus to Ranelagh and then the 44 bus to Enniskerry. Enniskerry being a mountainous area. This was the last definite sighting of her, but she's next allegedly seen in a pub called Johnny Fox's in Glencullen. If this was her, a man paid for her to go in. Nowadays though, police don't believe she was ever even there. There's a lot more to it and I do have a full YouTube video on it, so definitely go check it out if you're interested. But tomorrow I'm going to be sharing the theories and the most recent case updates. This actually might be solved. Annie McCarrick Part 2. Theory 1. A guy at this bar that she was allegedly seen in was actually in the IRA. A connection was made from a police sketch that he was in the IRA and hiding in Glencullen. Allegedly, he got drunk and spilled all these IRA secrets to Annie and then he had to kill her. But then again, we don't even know if she was ever there. Theory 2, she had a romantic interest. Annie was allegedly seeing a mystery man at the time of her disappearance, so there could be a potential crime of passion here. No real evidence though. Theory 3, a serial killer. Annie was the first of 8 disappearances in a 5-year period within a relatively small radius. Some people believe that Larry Murphy was responsible for some or maybe even all of these disappearances. This is a guy who was put away for rape and attempted murder. But I genuinely couldn't find anything to back that up. Theory 4, new update. In just the last few months, investigators have identified a suspect that they believe to have murdered Annie. This guy allegedly paid for a snack for her in a cafe in Enniskerry, and then they left. There might actually be some more updates soon, so click the plus sign for more. Robledo Puch graduated from petty theft to accidental killings to deliberate murder in the space of 4 years. And as a young man, he was a nice boy, but he really struggled with obeying authority. Over his life of crime, he stole over 7 million pesos, which is about 280,000 euro. And he killed 11 people. Is it just me, or does it hit different when a serial killer is like low-key cute? He allegedly killed his accomplice Jorge in a car accident, where he staged a car accident, but it killed Jorge and he got off scot-free, not a scratch. And he just straight up shot his other accomplice, Hector Somoza, and then he blowtorched his face off. This is him now at the age of 68 after spending 48 years in prison, and he still denies all the murders. If anything in true crime triggers you, just don't watch this, because Albert Fish was the actual boogeyman. When Albert was placed in an orphanage as a kid, he was frequently abused, but he low-key enjoyed the physical beatings. There, he was also introduced to urolagnia and coprophagia, eating and drinking human waste. In his early adulthood, he began molesting children, and it was usually boys under the age of 6. After that, he became obsessed with sexual mutilation. He got into a relationship with a mentally vulnerable man and kept him in a barn for like 2 weeks and just tortured him the whole time. He cut off half of this guy's penis. He got into self-harm, and he later was found to have 29 needles lodged in his pelvic region, and he literally set his own ass on fire. I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't be laughing, but like, what the hell? In general, he claimed that God was commanding him to torture, mutilate, and murder young children. I'm gonna need 2 to 3 days to process this one, but thank you, Kieran, for the request. Comment your case suggestions below and click the plus sign for more true crime. You're gonna need a strong stomach for this one. I'm gonna put a trigger warning here about sexual abuse and suicide. Katelyn Nicole Davis was a 12-year-old from Georgia in the USA. She was quite active on social media. She had a blog and she also live streamed almost every day for a while. Her mother Tammy was very aggressive and verbally abusive and potentially even a drug addict. Her biological father was hardly around, and according to her, he actually abandoned her. It gets way worse though. Her stepfather allegedly sexually assaulted her and encouraged her to kill herself. But the thing about Katelyn, she was already struggling with depression. She then got herself an online boyfriend because she didn't really have anyone in real life. He ended up being an adult and a sexual predator with a thing for 12-year-old girls. Makes me so sick. So unfortunately, this plus all the other shit that was thrown her way eventually got to her, and she did take her own life on a live stream. Where is Megan Mulqueeny? Megan Mulqueeny disappeared in late July 1984, straight after her shift in Big W in Canberra, Australia. Allegedly, she had planned to have lunch with a guy called Philip T, who had been trying to get her to go out with him for a whole year. So she literally disappeared when they were meant to meet up. So he was either very suspicious or really unlucky in his timing. However, there was another suspect called Paul Vincent Phillips who abducted and sexually assaulted another girl from the same car park that Megan went missing from. And this was only 2 months after Megan's disappearance. Paul then went on to be a serial violent sex offender. There's also some sketchy circumstantial evidence around Paul, which I'll tell you about in a sec. But interestingly enough, Paul died 2 years ago, and straight after he died, several leads were put forward to the police about him. TikToks are way too short, but I just put up a full YouTube video on it so you can check out all that weird circumstantial evidence that's sketchy. Okay, so we've heard a lot about people who kill people, but what about children who kill people? This is very gruesome, so proceed with caution. Mary Bell was only 11 years old when she strangled 2 young boys to death. One was 3 and one was 4. Her mother was a sex worker who was never home, and she didn't even know who her father was. Over the years, Mary had accidentally taken several sleeping pills, and she had also fallen out of a window a couple of times. The theory is that her mother caused these accidents. And her mother had also forced her into some situations. Probably too upsetting to say on TikTok, but I'm sure you can imagine. So in 1968, she strangled that 4-year-old boy in an abandoned house on her own. And it was 2 months later when her and a friend did the same to the 3-year-old boy in a wasteland area. Mary later returned with a scissors to carve an M into his body, scratch his legs, cut his hair, and mutilate his... I have no words. Just when I thought this guy was not that bad, shit got real. Peewee Gaskin was born last in a string of illegitimate children. Kinda cute fact, he was nicknamed Peewee because he was 5'4" and only 59 kilos when he was a fully grown man. He was more or less neglected as a child, and as a teenager he went to court for a crime spree involving robberies, assaults and gang sexual assault. When he was in reform school after this, his fellow inmates regularly sexually assaulted him. So he was released at the age of 18, but it didn't take long for him to get back into prison because he attacked a girl with a hammer. While he was in prison then, he gained other inmates' respect by killing the most feared inmate in there. It's like he was making up for his size with this violent courage. He was in and out of prison a number of times. Then in the early 70s, when he was a free man for a while, he went on a killing spree. He kept the bodies of 8 of his victims, meaning there were more, on his property in Prospect. He was sentenced to death, and while on death row, he admitted to between 100 and 110 murders. Whoa. Comment your case suggestions below and click the plus sign for more true crime. What is even going on in this case? Clyde Daniels, or Baby Joe, was a non-verbal autistic child. His mother and father both suffered with mental health issues, struggled financially, and had an abusive relationship. One night in April 2018, Baby Joe disappeared and has never been seen again. Just 3 days later, Joseph, his father, confessed to murdering him in a blacked out state. He says, "If I did it, it wasn't intentional." Due to his blacked out state, he couldn't remember what he did with Baby Joe's body. But he still brought the police to 5 or 6 locations saying, "This is where I brought Baby Joe." In case you didn't guess, Baby Joe was in none of these locations. So did Joseph even do it? Over time, he started to accuse Crystal, his wife, of having something to do with it. He said that she called someone in the middle of the night to come pick Baby Joe up the night he disappeared. And then video evidence surfaced of a vehicle pulling up to the residence, staying there for a second and driving away. What the fuck? The trial starts in 3 months, and I've covered everything up until now in 2 parts on my YouTube. This woman believes she was an angel sent from heaven to get rid of pedophiles. I don't even have words. Sheila LaBarre's life got off to a very rocky start, including physical, sexual and psychological abuse. One of her several marriages was to a man called Ronnie. Ronnie once reported that he would lay awake at night in fear that she would kill him with scissors. That marriage ended pretty quickly. She used to visit these homeless shelters and prey on these vulnerable men, like literally take them home with her. She would give them a place to stay in exchange for sex. This led to these 2 men being taken in by her on separate occasions, Kenneth County and Michael Deloge. During their respective stays with Sheila, she accused them both of being pedophiles, and weirdly enough, they both disappeared. When police had reason to suspect Sheila of foul play in their disappearances, they searched her property. And they found this bone, and when they asked her what it belonged to, she said the following: "It's either a rabbit or a pedophile." There's a lot more to it, but I covered the whole thing on my YouTube, so go check it out on my page. How well do you really know your neighbours? Dennis Rader was a polite, well-respected man in the community. He went to college, he served in the US Air Force, and this guy literally was a volunteer Cub Scout leader. There was another side to him. From a very young age, he tortured and killed small animals, and he had sadistic sexual fantasies about torturing trapped and helpless women. He would wait in people's homes for hours so that he could kill them when they got home. In 1974, he bound, gagged and killed 4 members of the same family, leaving their 15-year-old immediate relative to find them. And this is where he got his nickname BTK Killer, for bind, torture, kill. He went on to kill 10 people, and there was a sexual aspect to it as well, where he would take Polaroids of his victims' bodies in several positions in bondage. When he was given his 10 consecutive life sentences, he spoke in court like it was an acceptance speech for like half an hour. These 2 trigger warning: sexual violence. As a child, Paul Bernardo's father was very much a sex offender. So naturally, when Paul grew up, he sexually assaulted so many people that he became known as the Scarborough Rapist. Soon he became involved with none other than his own Barbie, Carla Homolka. But when Paul and Carla were engaged, he became obsessed with her 15-year-old sister Tammy. I'm talking masturbating in her room while she was asleep. Kind of obsessed. He drugged and raped her on more than one occasion, and Carla didn't just let it happen, but she helped. One time it went too far because Tammy started vomiting from all the alcohol they'd fed her, and she died. They did similar to 2 other 15-year-olds and 1 14-year-old. When their case went to trial, Paul had the audacity to say that the deaths of their victims were accidental. Anyway, he went to prison. But something I didn't realize until today was Carla got out in 2005 at the age of 35. This case is way too long for one TikTok. If you have a fear of flying, maybe keep swiping. In March 2014, MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, but it never got there. In fact, it never got anywhere. Last communicated with air traffic control 38 minutes after taking off. It was tracked by military radar for another hour, but what was weird is it was going the total opposite direction of Beijing. And that's it, it just disappeared. All that's ever been found of it was some debris just off the coast of Africa, but the bulk of the plane has never been found, despite so many searches. The man that's found most of this debris has received death threats, such as stop looking for debris or you will leave Madagascar in a coffin. So many theories, including hijackers took the plane to a remote island and passengers were taken as hostages. Terrorist attack. The plane landed vertically in the water, so the bulk of it has never been found. Plane was shot down. Fire in the cockpit. It was actually MH17 which crashed in Ukraine 4 months later. Plane was consumed by a black hole. The plane was traveling to or from a different dimension. Or aliens. Leave in the comments what you think happened. 3 things you didn't know about psychopaths. Number 3 might concern you. Number 1, the reason psychopaths are master manipulators is because this is one of the main and only things that releases dopamine in their brains. But the enjoyment you might get from a first kiss or a promotion is the same feeling that they get when they successfully manipulate a person. Number 2, despite popular belief, psychopaths do actually have empathy. The difference between their empathy and a non-psychopathic person's empathy though is they can just turn it off whenever they want. Number 3, 1 in 100 people is a psychopath. That's a pretty high percentage, but despite what movies and everything have told you, they're not all violent and murderers. This is why we tell women not to walk alone at night. Peter Sutcliffe, aka the Yorkshire Ripper, actually had a pretty normal upbringing. He was just a bit of a loner. As he grew up though, he did have a bit of a thing with prostitutes and he would spy on them and the men availing of their services. In 1969, he assaulted a prostitute by hitting her, but his next assault would be a lot more aggressive. A woman was walking alone at night and he slashed her stomach with a knife. He then seemed to get a kick out of stabbing women and hitting them with hammers. One of his victims he stabbed 52 times. Listen, long story short, he went on to murder 13 women and attacked 9 others, and several of the women he killed were sex workers. Eventually though, he did get caught and of course went to prison. But last Friday, he passed away at age 74, actually with coronavirus. At least something good is coming from this pandemic. And that brings us to the end of this week's video. I know it was a little different, it was probably a little weird, but it's nice to change it up every now and again. And if you enjoyed this kind of video, then let me know, because I will definitely do this again if you want. And if you want to follow me on TikTok, it's KatePhilpott_YT, and it's the same for Instagram and Twitter as well. It basically goes TikTok, more true crime content, Instagram, case updates, and me living life, I don't know. Twitter is like a diary and all of my inner thoughts and case updates as well. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and comment down below what your thoughts were. What was your favorite case, if that's a thing? What did you find most interesting? What are your thoughts on each of those cases, or one of those cases? Also, before you go, if you've come this far and you haven't subscribed already, help me out, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and I will see you in next week's video. Bye guys.